They saw his clothes, and decided his worth. No one sat next to him. No one called his name. And little by little, he started to believe he didn't matter. But what they didn't know is that the boy they ignored was about to prove something they would never forget. Stay with me, because this story might change the way you see people forever. Before this story begins, subscribe if you believe people deserve respect no matter what they have. 1. His name was Daniel, and if you saw him walking into school, you might not notice him at first, or maybe you would, but for the wrong reasons. His shoes were worn down at the edges, the fabric slightly torn, as if they had already lived a long life before reaching his feet. His backpack hung loosely on one shoulder, faded and patched, carrying not just books, but a quiet weight he never talked about. Every morning, he stepped through the school gates with the same silent hope, maybe today will be different. But deep down, there was always that tight feeling in his chest, a mix of fear and anticipation, like walking into a place where you're seen, but never truly accepted. The hallway was loud, lockers slamming, laughter echoing, voices bouncing off the walls, but somehow around Daniel, there was an invisible space. People moved past him like he wasn't there. A few glanced, some whispered, others simply looked away. He kept his eyes low, pretending to focus on the floor tiles as he walked. Not because he was ashamed of who he was, but because he was tired of seeing the same reactions reflected in people's faces: judgment, discomfort, indifference. And even though he never said a word about it, you could feel it. Daniel wasn't just walking into school. He was walking into a place where he already felt like he didn't belong. 2. At first, it was just small things. The kind people pretend don't matter. A quiet laugh when he passed by. Someone covering their nose in an exaggerated way. A whisper that wasn't meant to be heard, but always was. "Does he even have other clothes?" one girl murmured to her friend, just loud enough. "I don't think so," the other replied, glancing back at him with a smirk. Daniel heard it. He always did. But he kept walking, his face still, his hands tightening slightly around the strap of his backpack. Inside, though, there was a flicker of shame, hot and uncomfortable, followed by something heavier, a quiet anger he didn't know what to do with. In class, it wasn't much different. When the teacher asked students to form groups, chairs scraped loudly across the floor, but no one moved toward him. It was like an unspoken rule. People grouped up quickly, laughing, talking, avoiding eye contact with him as if getting too close might somehow pull them into his world. He would end up alone, pretending it didn't bother him. Pretending he preferred it that way. But the truth? Every laugh felt sharper than the last. Every whisper dug a little deeper. And as the days went by, it stopped feeling like coincidence. And started feeling like something much worse, like he had already been judged, labeled, and quietly rejected, without ever being given a chance. 3. Lunchtime was the hardest part of the day. The cafeteria was full of noise, trays clattering, chairs scraping, loud conversations mixing into one constant buzz. The smell of warm food filled the air, but for Daniel, it only made the moment feel heavier. He stood there for a second, holding his tray, scanning the room. Every table had groups, friends leaning close, laughing, sharing stories. It looked warm, safe, like a place where people belonged. Then there was him. Daniel walked slowly, pretending he was just deciding where to sit, but the truth was, he already knew. There was only one place left for him. A small table near the corner, slightly away from everyone else. He sat down quietly. The chair made a soft creak as he pulled it in, a sound that felt louder than it really was. He kept his eyes on his food, trying not to look around too much. But even without looking, he could feel it. A glance from across the room. A whisper followed by a quick laugh. Someone nudging another and subtly pointing in his direction. His chest tightened. He picked up his fork, his hand steady on the outside, but inside, everything felt shaky. Each bite felt heavier than it should, like he was swallowing more than just food, like he was swallowing silence, loneliness, and the painful feeling of being unwanted. At one point, a group passed by his table. One of them slowed down for just a second and said, barely hiding a smirk, "Man, I could never sit there." They kept walking, laughing. Daniel didn't react. He didn't look up. He just kept eating, slower now, as if nothing had happened. But inside, something sank deeper. Because it wasn't just about sitting alone anymore. It was the realization that even his presence was something people avoided. If you've ever felt judged or left out, hit like, this story is for you. 4. One afternoon, something happened that Daniel couldn't just ignore, no matter how hard he tried. He was walking past a group of students near the lockers, his steps quiet, almost careful, like he was trying not to disturb the air around them. Their laughter was loud, careless, the kind that fills a space without asking permission. As he passed by, one of them spoke up, not even bothering to lower his voice. "I'd never be friends with him," the boy said, shaking his head with a small, dismissive laugh. "Look at him, he has nothing." The group chuckled. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Daniel froze for half a second. It was quick. So quick that no one else noticed. But inside him, everything stopped. The hallway noise faded into the background, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. He has nothing. Those words didn't just land. They sank deep. He slowly kept walking, his face expressionless, his pace steady. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, something shifted in a way that felt permanent. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't about clothes or shoes or sitting alone at lunch. It was about how they saw him. How they reduced him to nothing. And for the first time, Daniel felt something stronger than sadness. A quiet mix of anger and pain, and a question that echoed in his mind as he walked away. Am I really worth that little, or have they just never looked close enough? 5. That night, the world felt quieter than usual. Daniel sat at the small wooden table in his house, the surface marked with scratches from years of use. A single dim light hung above him, casting soft shadows on the walls. The house wasn't big, just enough space for what they needed, but it carried a warmth that no one at school could see. The clock ticked slowly. His mother wasn't home yet. She was working late again, like she always did. Daniel glanced at the empty chair across from him, imagining her tired smile, her gentle voice asking, "How was your day?" He looked down at his hands instead. For a moment, the words from earlier came back, louder this time. He has nothing. Daniel swallowed hard, his chest tightening again, but this time, he didn't push the feeling away. He let it sit there. He let himself feel it fully. The shame, the anger, the quiet sadness that had been building for so long. Then his eyes slowly moved around the room. The old couch. The neatly folded blanket his mother always kept clean. The small shelf with a few books he had read over and over again. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And suddenly, something inside him shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. They didn't have a lot, but they had dignity. They had effort. They had a kind of strength no one at school seemed to understand. Daniel took a slow breath, his shoulders straightening just a little. For the first time, instead of asking why me, a different thought formed in his mind. Maybe they're wrong. Not about his situation, but about his value. And in that quiet moment, sitting alone at that worn table, something new began to grow inside him. Not confidence yet. Not strength fully formed. But something just as powerful. The beginning of a decision. 6. The next morning didn't look any different. But for Daniel, it felt different. The same streets, the same cracked sidewalk under his shoes, the same cold morning air brushing against his face. But inside him, something had changed. That quiet decision from the night before was still there, small but steady. As he walked toward the school gates, the familiar feeling of fear tried to return. His chest tightened slightly, his steps slowed for just a second. The voices, the looks, the whispers, he knew they would still be there. And they were. As soon as he entered, the noise surrounded him again. Laughter, conversations, lockers slamming. A few students glanced at him, just like always. One or two whispered. Nothing had changed around him. But this time, he didn't lower his head as much. It was a small thing, almost invisible to anyone else. But for Daniel, it took courage. In class, when the teacher started explaining a new topic, he leaned forward slightly, paying closer attention than usual. His eyes followed every word, his mind focused, as if something inside him had locked onto a new direction. If they think I'm nothing, I'll show them something they can't ignore. The thought wasn't loud or aggressive. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proving, first to himself, that he was more than what they saw. Later, when the teacher asked a question, the room went quiet for a moment. No one answered. A few students avoided eye contact, not wanting to be called on. Daniel hesitated. His hand twitched slightly on the desk. His heart started beating faster. Doubt crept in quickly. What if I get it wrong? What if they laugh? For a second, the old fear almost won. But then he remembered the night before, the empty chair, his mother's effort, the word nothing echoing in his mind. Slowly, with a deep breath, he raised his hand. It wasn't high. It wasn't confident. But it was enough. The teacher noticed. Yes, Daniel. Every eye turned toward him. For a brief moment, the room felt too big, too loud, too heavy. But Daniel spoke anyway. And in that simple act, quiet, shaky, but brave, he took his very first step toward becoming someone they would no longer be able to ignore. 7. From that day on, Daniel made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't go unnoticed again. Not because of what he lacked, but because of what he could do. His routine began to change. While most students rushed out of school the moment the bell rang, laughing and planning their afternoons, Daniel stayed behind. The classroom grew quieter, the golden light from the late afternoon sun stretching across the desks. Dust floated in the air, visible in the silence. He sat there, reviewing lessons, rewriting notes, trying to understand things not just enough to pass, but enough to master them. At home, it wasn't easy. The house was still small. The light still dim. Sometimes the noise from outside crept in, cars passing, distant voices, but inside, Daniel created his own world. A world of focus. He studied at the same worn table, his elbows resting on its rough surface. Some nights, his eyes grew heavy. His head would tilt forward for a second, then he'd force himself back up. Keep going. There were moments of frustration too. Times when he didn't understand something, when the words on the page blurred together, when doubt whispered, maybe they're right about you. And for a second, he believed it. But then came something new, something stronger. No. Not this time. He would take a deep breath, start again, slower, more patient. Line by line. Word by word. This wasn't talent. This was effort. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into quiet progress. In class, his answers became clearer. More confident. Not perfect, but stronger. Teachers started noticing. A slight nod. A pause of recognition. Small things, but they meant everything. The students around him noticed too. At first, it was subtle. A raised eyebrow. A quick glance when his name was mentioned. The same people who once ignored him now looked at him with something different. Not kindness yet, but curiosity. And even though Daniel still sat alone, still walked those same hallways, something had changed. He was no longer just the boy they pitied or mocked. He was becoming someone they didn't understand anymore. And sometimes, that's the first step to being seen. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated like Daniel? 8. One afternoon, as the classroom slowly emptied and the usual noise faded into the distance, Daniel stayed in his seat, reviewing his notes like he had been doing for weeks. The sunlight coming through the window painted long shadows across the floor, and the air felt calm, almost peaceful. Daniel. He looked up, slightly startled. It was Mr. Lewis. The teacher stood near the front of the room, holding a few papers, observing him, not in the usual quick way teachers look at students, but with attention. Real attention. "Can you stay for a minute?" he asked gently. Daniel hesitated, his mind racing for a second. Did I do something wrong? That old fear still lived inside him. But he nodded quietly. When the last student left and the door clicked shut, the room fell completely silent. Mr. Lewis walked closer, placing the papers on the desk. "I've been noticing something," he said. Daniel's hands tightened slightly. "Your work," the teacher continued. "It's improving, a lot." Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being seen like this. Not for something good. "I see effort," Mr. Lewis added, his voice calm but firm. "An effort like that, it matters more than anything else." For a moment, Daniel just looked at him, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to believe those words, but another part, the part shaped by all the whispers and laughter, held him back. "I just try," Daniel said quietly, his voice almost uncertain. Mr. Lewis gave a small nod. "That's exactly it. Most people don't." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just real. Then the teacher leaned slightly against the desk, looking directly at him. "Listen to me, Daniel. You don't need what they have. You don't need their approval, their clothes, their opinions." He paused for a second, making sure the words landed. "What you need is to believe that you can go further than them." Those words hit differently. Not like the whispers. Not like the laughter. These words didn't try to push him down. They lifted something inside him. Something that had been buried for a long time. Daniel felt it, a small spark of hope, mixed with fear. Because believing in yourself, after everything, is not easy. But for the first time, someone else believed in him. And sometimes, that's where everything begins to change. 9. From that day on, Daniel carried Mr. Lewis's words with him. Not loudly, not like a slogan, but quietly, like something fragile he was learning to protect. Believe you can go further than them. At first, it felt strange. Almost uncomfortable. Every time that thought appeared in his mind, another voice tried to shut it down. Who do you think you are? Don't forget how they see you. But this time, Daniel didn't let that voice win so easily. He started pushing himself in ways he never had before. When the teacher asked difficult questions, he didn't immediately look down anymore. His heart still raced, his hands still felt slightly cold. But now, there was something else inside him too. Courage. And slowly, that courage began to show. One day, he answered a complex question in class. The room went quiet, not with mockery, but with surprise. A few students exchanged looks. One of them even frowned slightly, confused. Was that really him? Daniel noticed. Of course he did. For a brief second, that old feeling of fear came back. What if they laugh now? What if I mess up next time? But then he remembered. This wasn't about them anymore. After class, something unusual happened. A student who had never spoken to him before walked past, then slowed down just a little. He didn't say anything, just gave Daniel a quick look, almost like he was trying to figure him out. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't rejection either. And for Daniel, that difference mattered more than anyone could understand. He kept going. Late afternoons turned into long nights of studying. His eyes burned sometimes, his body felt tired, but deep inside, something was growing stronger with every page he read, every problem he solved. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving something to himself. That he wasn't nothing. That he never had been. And little by little, the boy they once ignored was becoming someone impossible to overlook. 10. By now, the change was undeniable. Daniel's name started appearing at the top of test results. Not once. Not by accident. Again and again. Each time the teacher handed back papers, there was a small pause, just enough for people to notice. At first, the reactions were quiet. A raised eyebrow. A whisper behind a hand. A quick look at his paper, then at their own. How is he doing this? The same students who once ignored him now paid attention, but not in the way he had once hoped. There was no warmth yet, no invitation to sit together, no real connection. Just curiosity, and a hint of discomfort. It was as if Daniel had broken an unspoken rule. One afternoon, during a group activity, something unusual happened. The teacher assigned teams randomly this time. No one could choose. Daniel ended up in a group with 3 classmates who had never spoken to him before. There was a moment of silence when they realized. One of them sighed quietly. Another avoided eye contact. The third forced a small, awkward smile. "All right, let's just get this done," one of them said, his tone flat. Daniel felt it, that familiar sting of being unwanted. For a second, the old feeling returned, heavy and sharp. They still don't want me here. But instead of pulling back, instead of staying silent like before, he leaned in. "Maybe we can start with this part," he said, pointing at the assignment, his voice calm but firm. They hesitated. Then slowly, they followed. As the minutes passed, something shifted. Daniel explained things clearly, patiently. Not trying to show off. Not trying to prove anything. Just helping. One of them frowned at first, then nodded slightly. Another started asking questions. The third stopped avoiding eye contact. It wasn't friendship. But it wasn't rejection either. By the end of the activity, the tension had softened. Not gone, but changed. As they packed up, one of them muttered, almost without thinking, "That actually helped." Daniel heard it. He didn't react. Didn't smile. Didn't say anything. But inside, something warmed. Because for the first time, his presence wasn't something people avoided. It was something useful. And sometimes, respect doesn't arrive all at once. It begins in small, unexpected moments, like this one. 11. A few weeks later, something happened that changed everything. The school announced a major event, a national academic competition. It wasn't something small or ordinary. This was the kind of event that brought recognition, pride, and pressure. Only one student would be chosen to represent the entire school. When the announcement echoed through the classroom, excitement spread instantly. Students whispered, speculated, some already imagining themselves on that stage. Daniel stayed quiet. He didn't even consider it at first. But then the teacher began to speak again, this time more seriously. The student representing our school, mister. Lewis said, looking around the room, will be chosen based on performance, discipline, and consistency. A silence followed. Then, his eyes stopped. On Daniel. For a moment, time felt frozen. Daniel felt his heart pound hard against his chest. His fingers tightened slightly on the edge of his desk. No, not me. But deep down, he already knew. Later that day, it was confirmed. Daniel will represent our school. The room reacted instantly. Not with applause. Not with support. With shock. A few students exchanged looks. One of them let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. Another leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slightly. Him. Seriously. Daniel heard it all. That familiar mix of doubt and judgment filled the room again, but this time, it felt different. Stronger. More direct. Because now, it wasn't just about him anymore. He wasn't invisible anymore. Now he was carrying something bigger, the name of the school, the expectations, even of the same people who once refused to sit next to him. That pressure settled heavily on his shoulders. As he walked out of the classroom that day, the hallway felt different. The looks lasted longer. The whispers were sharper. But inside him, something else was happening. Fear, yes. Doubt, still there. But also something new. A quiet, rising strength. Because this wasn't just another test. This was the moment where everything he had been building would finally be seen. Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything. 12. The day of the competition arrived faster than Daniel expected. The building was larger than anything he was used to. Bright lights, polished floors, voices echoing from every direction. Students from other schools walked confidently through the halls, dressed neatly, laughing, talking like they belonged there. Daniel stood still for a moment, taking it all in. For a second, that old feeling came back. You don't belong here. His hands felt slightly cold. His heartbeat quickened. He looked down at his own clothes, simple, clean, but still far from what others were wearing. Doubt crept in quietly. What if they're right? What if this is too much? He swallowed hard. Then, almost like a flash, memories rushed through his mind. The empty seat at lunch. The whispers in the hallway. The words, "He has nothing." And right after that, his mother, working late. Mr. Lewis's voice, "Believe you can go further than them." The long nights. The effort. The struggle. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, took a deep breath. And when he opened them again, something had changed. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. As he stepped into the competition room, the air felt heavy with tension. Judges sat at the front, serious and focused. Other participants were already in their seats, flipping through notes, some whispering last-minute thoughts. Daniel walked to his place. Each step felt deliberate. Each breath, steady. When the competition began, the first question was announced. It was complex, demanding focus and clarity. For a split second, the pressure hit him like a wave. But instead of freezing, he leaned in. His mind started working. Not fast, not rushed, but precise. Calm. One question turned into another. Then another. The noise around him faded. There were no whispers here. No laughter. No judgment. Only the challenge. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't thinking about proving anyone wrong. He was simply showing who he had become. 13. As the final round approached, the tension in the room became almost visible. You could hear it in the silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Pens tapping lightly. chairs shifting, a quiet cough echoing in the distance. Everyone knew this was it. Daniel sat still, his hands resting on the table. His breathing was controlled, but his heart, it was beating fast. Across the room, a scoreboard displayed the top participants. His name was there, near the top. A few students glanced at him now, not with doubt this time, but with something closer to disbelief, maybe even respect. But Daniel didn't look back. The final question was announced. It was harder than anything before. Complex, layered, the kind of problem that could break your focus in seconds if you let pressure take over. For a brief moment, everything came rushing back. The cafeteria, the laughter, the voice saying, "He has nothing." His chest tightened. Doubt tried one last time. What if this is where you fail? What if they were right all along? Daniel's fingers pressed slightly against the table. Then, he closed his eyes for just a second. And instead of the noise, he chose silence. Instead of the fear, he chose everything he had built. The long nights, the effort, the belief he fought so hard to grow. When he opened his eyes again, there was no hesitation. He leaned forward and began. Step by step. Careful. Focused. Steady. Time seemed to slow down. The room disappeared again. There was no audience, no judgment. Just the problem in front of him and the strength he had earned. When he finished, he placed his pen down quietly. No dramatic movement. No sign of victory. Just calm. Minutes later, the results were announced. And the winner is... A pause. Daniel. For a second, silence. Then the room erupted. Applause filled the space, louder than anything he had ever heard before. People stood, some in shock, others clapping with genuine admiration. Daniel didn't move immediately. He just sat there, taking it in. Not the noise. Not the applause. But the moment. Because this wasn't just a win. This was the answer to every doubt, every rejection, every moment he was told he was nothing. And now, everyone could see the truth he had fought to believe all along. 14. When Daniel finally stood up, the applause was still echoing through the room. It felt unreal. The same world that once felt cold and distant now seemed to open around him. People looked at him differently, not with judgment, not with pity, but with recognition. As he walked off the stage, a few competitors nodded at him with respect. One even gave a small, sincere smile. No words were needed. But the real moment came later, when he returned to school. The hallway that once felt heavy now buzzed with a different kind of energy. Students who had never spoken to him before suddenly knew his name. Some whispered, but not the same way as before. That's him. He won. I didn't expect that. Daniel walked through it all, calm, steady. Not proud in a loud way, just grounded. Then near the lockers, the same place where he once heard those painful words, something unexpected happened. One of the boys who had laughed at him stepped forward. He hesitated. For a moment, it looked like he might turn away, like pride might stop him. But then he took a breath and spoke. "Hey, Daniel." Daniel stopped. There was a short silence. The noise around them faded just a little. The boy began, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I was wrong about you." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. "I shouldn't have said those things," he added, avoiding eye contact for a second. "That was messed up." Daniel looked at him. For a brief moment, all the memories came back. The laughter, the whispers, the feeling of being nothing. He could have ignored him. He could have walked away. But he didn't. Instead, He gave a small nod. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just enough to say, "I heard you." Because Daniel had changed, but not into someone bitter. He had become someone stronger. Someone who understood that real victory isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about not losing yourself in the process. 15. Time passed, but that moment never left Daniel. Not the applause. Not the victory. But everything it took to get there. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. He still faced challenges. Still had days where doubt tried to come back quietly. But now, he knew something he didn't know before. He knew who he was. The boy who once sat alone at lunch was no longer invisible. Not because people finally looked at him, but because he had learned to see himself clearly. Opportunities started to appear. Teachers supported him. New paths opened. And slowly, Daniel built a future that once felt impossible. Not out of revenge, but out of purpose. And something even more powerful happened. He didn't forget. He didn't forget the feeling of being ignored. The silence. The pain of being judged without being known. So when he saw someone sitting alone, someone being overlooked, he didn't walk past. He stopped. He sat down. Because he understood. Years later, people would look at Daniel and see success. Confidence. Strength. But what they wouldn't always see was the quiet boy who once believed he was nothing. And maybe that's the most important part of his story. Because in the end, he didn't just prove others wrong. He proved to himself that his value was never defined by what he had, but by who he chose to become. So before you judge someone, before you decide they're not worth your time, remember this. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones the world almost overlooked. In the end, Daniel didn't win because he became richer. He won because he refused to believe he was less. The same people who once ignored him had to face the truth. They never saw his value. They only saw his circumstances. And life has a way of revealing what people miss at first glance. So before you look down on someone, before you decide they're not worth your time, remember this. The strongest people are often the ones the world underestimates the most. If this story touched you, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.